public affairs firm, which is also based in Brussels. But today I'm here to moderate this distinguished panel for my friend Enes, the head of the Circle Foundation. The Circle Foundation is a newly created different industries and associations to discuss the current state of international affairs. And obviously, what better to talk about than the famous topic around Brexit. So we had Brexit, that was our kind of Christmas Eve present here in Germany. We celebrate Christmas a day before you guys. So it was a quite big announcement to deal with. But obviously for the Prime Minister, the Oven-baked deal was done and dusted. But what does it actually mean for us, also for British citizens who are based in London and Europe? So I will not take the stage for too long today, and I will introduce you our distinguished panel. A range of experts, starting with Jill Rutter, who is an experienced civil servant, very well known, I think, to many of you here who has joined us today. She's at the moment a senior research fellow at For Government. So welcome, Jill.
Hello.
Hi. We have on the German side, Dr. Nikolai von Ondarza. He comes from SWP, which is the the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. And yeah, Nikolai will give us his view from the German angle, I think, today. Hello, Nikolai. Then we have Peter Kleppe, who is a Brussels-based research fellow at the US think tank Property Rights Alliance. And Peter also writes for The Telegraph and The Spectator. Then we have Professor Tim Bale, who is a professor at the Queen Mary University in London. So hello, Tim.
Hi.
And last but not least, we have Victoria, who is the head of the regulatory affairs at the Research Institute at the Institute of Economic Affairs. So you will see we have quite a good range of speakers, and I'm sure they have different views and perspectives that they will share with us. There are many topics to discuss. I mean, the deal is not oven-baked. We have still a lot of pending issues like financial services, which is a big question mark to all of us. So I'm hoping to hear from our distinguished panelists about these topics. The session will be around 1 hour, and I will ask each of our speakers to provide their views on the current state and what the deal means for the future of the EU-UK relations for around 5 to 10 minutes. And at the end of the session, we will have 10 to 15 minutes time to take some questions from the floor. So please use the chat button to drop your questions as we go. So if I may start, Jill, I would like to give the floor to you. And yeah, we would like to know what does this...
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much to the Circle Foundation for letting me talk. So I asked Enes earlier today, what do you want me to talk about? And he said, what does the deal mean from the point of view of the UK government? Victoria will probably be able to give a more sort of political perspective than me, but I'm going to try and say what does it mean for the UK government looking. So the Prime Minister on Christmas Eve was clearly very pleased. He was very pleased that he could unveil a deal, had confounded those who said it would be impossible to do a deal in that time, that he was heading for no deal, that he should have asked for an extension, used that provision in the withdrawal agreement back in the summer, and could say that he sort of confounded the gloomsters who said you're never going to get a deal. And from the point of view of the sort of Brexit the Prime Minister wanted, this, I think, is a deal that delivers a lot of the promises that Vote Leave made in the referendum campaign. Clearly, what Vote Leave never offered was a cut and dried blueprint for Brexit, the sort of thing you might expect to see in a general election as a manifesto. But if you look at the critical promises, taking back control of the borders, the UK has now embarked on a new and quite different migration regime, and freedom of movement, which certainly for a lot of Leave voters, big issue, has ended from the EU. And we now have a migration regime that treats people wanting to come to the UK from the EEA or from anywhere else in the world the same. We no longer make a contribution to the EU budget, taking back control of our money, taking back control of our waters. That sort of appeared a bit later. Perhaps that wasn't quite the success we might have hoped, given the nature of the fisheries deal. And taking back control of our laws, having the right to diverge from EU regulation, and almost entirely, at least for Great Britain, eliminating the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. So if you regard that as the scorecard of what did I want out of this deal, then you can say, actually, yeah, job more or less done. What we saw was the sort of deal that you get when you get a deal negotiated by government that is prioritizing those, if you like, political objectives, the sovereignty objectives, over a deal which prioritizes the economic relationship with the EU. This is a very, very different deal from the sort of deal that Theresa May envisaged in her Chequers proposal. But remember, although she might call it a Chequers deal, that was a deal roundly rejected by the EU at Salzburg as not a basis for the future relationship negotiation, not something to get into the political declaration. But Theresa May had come around to thinking actually she wanted a deal that avoided, for reasons associated both with the interest of British manufacturing, but also critically the border with Northern Ireland, the Irish border issue, that she wanted a deal that offered frictionless trade in goods. That had never been an objective of the Johnson government, which is a good thing, because if it had been an objective of the Johnson government, you could say that this deal does not deliver that. The Prime Minister, when he was announcing his deal, said, we've achieved a deal that delivers zero tariffs, zero quotas. That is right, as long as your goods meet the, in some cases, quite onerous rules of origin requirements. Slightly lost in the fine print there, Prime Minister. The Prime Minister also said, and there are no new non-tariff barriers. I think charitably, all we can say to the Prime Minister there is the Prime Minister misspoke. One of the very big differences between Boris Johnson's conception of a deal and Theresa May's conception of a deal was throughout. Theresa May said she wanted a bespoke relationship with the EU. Boris Johnson had a volte-face. He said, no, the last thing we want is a bespoke relationship. You remember that nice table you had, Michel Barnier, where you basically said, we're not doing any sort of bespoke deal with the UK. You pick a mix from this variety of, you don't mix, from this selection of models we developed earlier. They selected the Canada model, a distant relationship, a relationship that you might argue is more appropriate to a country whose border starts 3,500 miles away, 5,000 plus kilometers, rather than a country that shares a land border with you and 22 miles away. But the government's objective was a Canada-style deal, a loose relationship with the EU with attendant frictions and distance. And that is, in a sense, what they got. Obviously, the UK wanted a bit more than Canada. Both sides actually have got some of their pluses on a Canada-style deal. The UK's got provisions, for example, on trucks. Not a big issue between the EU and Canada. Not many trucks go over that border. Very important if you have the degree of connectivity that the UK does with the EU. But most of the UK's other easements were pretty firmly rejected by the EU. If if you look at things like SPS equivalents, mutual recognition of professional qualifications, making it much easier for short-term business visits. The Prime Minister was just giving evidence today at the liaison committee, the first time that that we've had any real scrutiny. I think it lasted about 10 minutes of this deal from a government minister, and was being pressed on why he didn't get a better deal for UK touring musicians. So he's done his deal, he's got it through, it's now ratified. As Hatice was saying, there are a lot of loose ends to be tied up. There's a lot of scope, I think, for seeing how this deal really plays out. And I think, and I'm going to end here because I've probably taken enough time, I think the real question mark as we go forward is partly on the UK's side. How much do we use the flexibilities in this deal? And do we do it in a way that, if you like, throws down gauntlet after gauntlet, sees how far we can irritate the EU by the way in which we use those newfound flexibilities? Or do we just use it to sort of plough a slightly different course, enjoying the fact that actually we've got some new flexibilities, which actually we've seen a bit of, and are viewing quite positively on the early approve on things like the way in which we're managing the vaccine rollout for coronavirus. It's probably quite good for everybody concerned that the UK is not part of the current debates about the progress of the EU vaccine rollout. Do we do that? From the EU's point of view, I think the really interesting issue going forward is, does the EU regard the relationship with the UK now pretty much like Canada, which it will show as much interest in as its relationship with Canada, or does it basically think it's trapped the UK into an arrangement that neither side they wanted, a sort of Swiss on steroids? So, and that, I think, where you end up in permanent negotiation, permanent wrangling, and both sides ending up really quite disliking each other. So I think that's the big question going forward. And I think that will play out over the next few weeks, months, and years. But we do also have to remember that there's an absolutely critical thing that both sides have to act really responsibly over, that it is in neither side's interests for the Northern Ireland Protocol to become a constant source of irritation. Both sides said they were committed to ensuring that the meeting of the two red lines, the UK red line on sovereignty, the EU red line on the single market, did not destabilise the achievements of all sides in terms of the Good Friday Agreement. If Northern Ireland emerges as a great victim from this process, then it will do the stability of Northern Ireland and the credit of neither side any good at all. And there I'm going to end it.
Thank you, Jill. That was an awesome opening, and I think you gave a lot of fruit for further discussions here. Just want to pick up on that point, constant source of irritation, and hand it over to Germany, to the SWP. What do you think, Nicola?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for listening. When the deal was presented, as Hatice said, in Germany, Christmas is celebrated on the Christmas Eve and the 24th. I was already preparing Christmas dinner while the Prime Minister spoke, and tried to combine watching him with preparing the Christmas dinner. And I think that led to the Brexit deal itself not getting that much political attention in Germany. I think it's fair to say that before Christmas, most of the European political attention was focused on the EU budget negotiations, on the question of rule of law, on how to deal with Hungary and Poland. And only in the very sort of 3 to 4 days up to Christmas, the focus really went in the political side on the Brexit negotiations. And I think only after Christmas, German politicians started to read the deal. And I think the overall assessment, I would say, is also quite of a dampened satisfaction, I would maybe call it. Germany originally regretted Brexit very much, would have liked a closer economic relationship with the United Kingdom, but throughout these negotiations had always said that the primary ambition of the German government is to safeguard the cohesion of the EU 27. Germany invested a lot into protecting the interest of Ireland. Germany wanted to focus on protecting the integrity of the single market, so the 4 freedoms, and that the single market would not be divided up. And only afterwards came sort of the third ambition, an orderly Brexit and a stable future relationship with the United Kingdom. And I think on that benchmark, Germany was quite satisfied, as I said, in a dampened way with the outcome. The main target of Germany accepting the red lines of the UK was a strong level playing field, level playing field provisions. And that was in particularly raised through the events around the internal market bill. I think Germany on the outset already had strong level playing field provisions as a major target, but I think it cannot be underestimated how much of a shock the internal market bill was for the German public and the political scene. So the idea that a close partner and ally that, like the United Kingdom, would at least threaten to violate a treaty that it had just signed 8 months ago was regarded, I think, largely out of bounds by German politics. Who regard, I think it's fair to say, international politics very strongly through the prism of law. And therefore, sort of this target of Germany was even increased to have strong level playing field, also to protect its economic interests. I think a final piece of information about how Germany perceived the targets of the negotiations I would put on the table is that in German industry itself was strongly behind the approach by the European Commission and by the German government to put this focus on the integrity of the single market. There's always been this myth, at least in British media, about German car makers coming to the rescue and then pushing Angela Merkel to take over the Brexit talks right in like the White Knight and present a Brexit deal that is acceptable to the UK. And if you look at the German debate, it was precisely the opposite. German industry was very strongly behind the Commission, sometimes even tougher than the Commission itself on level playing fields. Conditions said that for German industries, the single market of the European Union is so much more important than even the market of the United Kingdom. And therefore, both for the EU 27 as a whole, also to industries was very clearly behind that strict approach on level playing field, but also the special solutions for Northern Ireland. And in connection to that, the German government also very forcefully rejected any kind of bilateral negotiations. So Germany, by chance, had the presidency of the Council of the European Union in the second half of 2020. And initially, some assumed there would come the time when Angela Merkel would say, okay, enough is enough. We are getting nowhere. I'm going to take over the Brexit negotiations. And the conscious choice by the German government was precisely the opposite, was the impression that if there was even a hint of Germany going bilateral in the Brexit negotiations, this would damage the interests of the EU 27, would also attract quite a few raised eyebrows in other EU member states. And very clearly, Angela Merkel didn't want to get involved in these negotiations. So you saw maybe some news reports in the kerfuffles before the final Brexit outcome that Merkel even refused to take a longer call by Boris Johnson and saying the negotiation is being conducted not by me, but by Ursula von der Leyen and Michel Barnier. And I think this was very important for Germany to show this is a negotiation between the EU 27 and the United Kingdom, and not between Berlin and London, or Berlin, Paris, Paris and London. And with that being said, I think on the final outcome, the assessment of the deal itself was, under the conditions that we're talking on, mostly positive. So it was positive for Germany, most of all, that we avoided a no-deal scenario, which would have been regarded as very damaging for the relations with the United Kingdom. It was seen as positive that there at least are zero tariffs zero quantitative restrictions, which allow at least a base economic relationship to continue, which is still important for Germany, German companies, which have, if you look at studies for which countries will be most affected by the current or by the Brexit outcome, you normally have Ireland at #1, then the Netherlands, and usually Germany as the third most affected country. So there is a positive assessment of the 0-0 outcome, and finally there is a positive assessment on the outcome on internal security, which was better than some in Berlin expected. More exchanges possible, not on the same level, of course, as for an EU member state, but in continued cooperation with the UK in internal security in the combat against international terrorism, where the UK is regarded as an important partner for Germany. What were the critics? Where is Germany more critical of the deal? I think overall it's fair to say that if you look back to 2016, Germany certainly would have preferred a closer economic relationship. So this is seen as the sort of lowest base that should be acceptable, something to build upon in the negotiations to come. And I think here the expectation, I think, or my personal assessment, will be disappointed to Jill. I don't think the UK can turn into Canada. We will see some sort of continuous negotiations between the EU and the UK, as there are too many important areas of connection, both between the economies, the people, and the countries. I think there was, secondly, a genuine disappointment in Erasmus, for that the UK does not continue to participate in Erasmus. Many German students like to study in the UK. I did so personally myself, not via Erasmus, but via a different program. And there is a strong cultural attachment in Germany to the UK. And I think the symbol that the UK would not only sever the economic and political ties, but also these cultural ties with the European Union, this was really something where German politicians would look at you and ask you, why would they even do that? Why don't they support this program that is to the benefit of both sides? I know you can argue the details, but I think there is this genuine disappointment in that. And finally, I think Germany would have liked a more deepened cooperation in foreign and security policy. There was really disappointment that the UK did not want to include that in the post-Brexit negotiations. But I think there was also the maybe possibly, like on the UK side with financial services, this perception that if there were offensive asks by the European Union in these negotiations, and foreign policy would then have turned into an offensive ask, this would have given the UK leverage to ask for more in these negotiations. This is a reason why Germany never strongly pushed for more than that after the UK decided we don't want to include that in the treaty, but this is certainly where Germany would have wanted more and would like to see more in the future, which brings me to my conclusion. I think, as I said, a dampened satisfaction. This is better than no deal, but certainly not what Germany would have originally wanted. The hope here is that this is a low point of EU-UK relations and a foundation that could be built upon, but we will see, as Jill has said, whether this indeed is a foundation to build up on or something that creates a lot of frictions between the two sides. And finally, I think there will be now a discussion in Germany on in which areas to cooperate bilaterally more with the UK. During the Brexit negotiations, Germany was very clear not to do any kind of strong bilateral agreements with the UK. There were several advances by the UK government, but Germany refused them, arguing we need to deal first with the EU-UK level, and the difficult Brexit negotiations to some extent have even been toxic for German-UK bilateral relations. And I think now that we have a foundation, if these relationships don't go completely sour, I expect a bigger willingness for Germany to cooperate with the UK, for instance, in foreign and security affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai. Very, very nice overview about Germany's stance on the current negotiations. Later in the Q&A, I want to come towards an important election that's coming up this year, which is in Germany, and how you think this might change the balances of relationships. But before that, I think now I would like to move on to another expert that we have here, Victoria. If I may call you on stage. You are an expert when it comes to border issues and financial services. And since London is the main hub and the capital of Europe when it comes to financial services, is the financial industry now floating towards Amsterdam, Berlin, and Paris, as we've been, discussing over the past few months, or what will happen now?
Well, I think on that, there's little evidence of that so far. There's certainly been some shifting of business towards European authorized institutions in order to safeguard the business that that firms who historically have traded in London have done. But I don't think we've seen the kind of forecast outflows of jobs and business that some people were predicting in the early days following the referendum in 2016. And I'll touch on that a bit more in my remarks as well. What I'm going to talk about really is first of all a bit on the narrow concepts of did the parties meet their negotiating objectives who won, who lost, and then a bit more broadly on does it deliver benefits to the citizens of the UK and the EU, and potentially more widely in free trade terms. And I think it's fair to say that both sides are claiming a win. And I think they might both be right. This is not a zero-sum situation, as Nikolai alluded to. The UK succeeded in getting zero tariffs and zero quotas on trade in goods, which is obviously great for both sides. What the UK also managed to get was no references to EU law, and therefore, in theory at least, no possibility for ECJ jurisdiction, apart from, as Jill mentioned, in respect of Northern Ireland, of course, and also successfully, I should say as well, no direct effect, which was a very important part of the sovereignty side of things. And the UK obviously also successfully resisted the EU's negotiating objectives to have EU law apply dynamically in terms of state aid or on a non-regression basis on the other level playing field matters. And also, let's not forget the EU included originally in the level playing field agricultural and food safety regulations. Now that's that's gone, which I would definitely say is a good outcome for the UK. And what we've got instead is general principles of non-regression and a general anti-subsidy regime with this novel rebalancing mechanism in the event of future divergence causing trade distortions. Now, I'm sure the UK negotiators would rather not have had those, as they are more intrusive, I would say, than traditional provisions on these kinds of matters in free trade agreements. But they certainly give us enough freedom to reform laws and regulations that free market Brexiteers like me can be pretty satisfied, albeit with some reservations that I'll come to in a second. Now, of course, the UK wanted much more by way of mutual recognition, especially in services and including in financial services, and the negotiations about equivalence in financial regulation and supervision are ongoing, and we'll see where that leads to. But the UK also wanted mutual recognition of conformity assessment in goods and wanted more liberal rules of origin, but ultimately was not willing to pay the EU's price in regulatory alignment commitments. Now, I consider this to be a loss for both sides, actually. The EU probably considers it to be a tactical win, or at least the reservation of an advantage in the sort of, and in a sort of narrow mercantilist sense. That's right. The UK will be under immense pressure to continue to align to EU goods regulations anyway, in order to mitigate the effects of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And actually the EU has no particular reason to reciprocate if they think the UK is going to fall into line anyway. Even though, of course, by doing so, it would actually be to the advantage of consumers and importing businesses in the EU. So more widely, though, I was encouraged to see that Boris Johnson in that famous Christmas Eve press conference, which I particularly enjoyed, because if you can't go to the pub on a Christmas Eve, what better way to spend the day than watching back-to-back press conferences with Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen for fun. So Boris Johnson did specifically refer to opportunities for regulatory competition that this deal will allow. Now, the EU clearly doesn't share that enthusiasm, as their emphasis on the level playing field and the reluctance to grant mutual recognition shows. In a way, for me, that represents an admission that the EU regulatory model actually does make it uncompetitive, and the kinds of costs that are usually dismissed or not mentioned at all when more and more regulations of the environment or workers' rights or anything is put forward. It's usually actually claimed that these kinds of regulations actually contribute and help with prosperity and growth. So I suppose one could ask, if you really believe that, why would you want to penalise a competitor for diverging from those regulations? But that's probably a separate issue. Similarly, with state aid controls, the end position seems pretty reasonable to me, and it covers principles that, as a supporter of free markets, limited government and limited state aid, I would definitely support. But the thought process behind it misses a fundamental point, which is it's the economy and the consumers and the taxpayers of the country that's giving subsidies and granting state aid that suffers and is disadvantaged because of the implications for innovation and competition in its own market. So that was, I guess we came to the right conclusion, but maybe by the wrong route. So while the deal is thin on regulation and services, I would say compared to the alternative of the enhanced mutual recognition being subject to tight alignment, I would say this is a win across the board, because deharmonization and change in the ecosystem, or at least I hope it will. And it's then to be hoped that good ideas will be tested both in the marketplace and at the ballot box. Now, there is one other, I think, sadly, quite significant loser. Again, Jill has alluded to this. And I just finally add that at the moment, the biggest loser is the people and the businesses in Northern Ireland, who are already suffering quite serious disruptions and shortages of goods in supermarkets as the Northern Ireland Protocol comes into effect. Sadly, I think this was an inevitable consequence of prioritising the absence of a trade border on the land border with the Republic of Ireland at the expense of the much more important trading relationship between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. I think it's definitely to be hoped that the UK and EU authorities will work together to come up with some practical solutions to mitigate the burdens of the protocol, and that the UK is going to act robustly, albeit within the law, to protect its citizens in Northern Ireland and apply, the checks and controls that are currently being applied in the most pragmatic and least burdensome way possible. So that's going to be one source of ongoing negotiation, I think, in the specialised committees devoted to the Northern Ireland Protocol. So that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Victoria. It's very interesting, that technical insight that you gave us, especially talking about an ongoing negotiation. I think we need to speak about when will this end? How long will these negotiations go for? that will be an interesting feedback from you guys later on. But without further ado, I would like to take Peter next. I think, Peter, you are based in Brussels, but at least you're working from Brussels. So give us the Brussels insight, please.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Indeed, based and working from Brussels. Thank you for the previous contributions, which I thought were all very, very informative. So personally, I was quite optimistic that there would be a deal, actually very optimistic, simply because the alternative is it would have been so devastating, also politically, that I did not deem this to be realistic. Now, however, at the moment, I'm less optimistic about the implementation. If you read about the problems that are visible at the border in Northern Ireland, also if you listen to reports of, for example, Belgian companies describing the trouble they have exporting to the UK, exporting plants. What you can see is that some online retailers in the UK no longer deliver to Europe because of VAT reasons. So I think a lot of reason to be worried about the immediate future. And of course, I hope I'm wrong. Now, what I would like to do is to give you basically an overview of what I consider to be, let's say, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the deal. I would take the bad and the ugly together, and there's quite a bit of bad and ugly. But fundamentally, I do think it is a deal that is relatively good. There's no tariff, which is good for both sides. The UK gets the opportunity to do better than the EU in closing trade deals. I mean, I think the EU has done a relatively good job in the last 20 years, but now the UK can at least try to do better. That's great. As Victoria also explained, there will be a degree of regulatory competition inserted. I think this is the core benefit of Brexit, not just for the United Kingdom, but also for European countries and the European Union, because it sort of puts more pressure on regulators to do better. For example, if the UK would come up with an alternative for GDPR or REACH, I know this is all very inconceivable at the moment, but I think that will ultimately also benefit EU consumers, because they would, and EU businesses, they would, for example, say, okay, why can we not follow the UK in having this more innovation-friendly regulatory model? Now, as I mentioned, I don't think that's going to happen very quickly, because, of course, everything is so closely tied to market access for the United Kingdom. But what if the EU comes up with an alternative for REACH? What if the EU comes up, for a successor of REACH? What if the EU comes up with GDPR2, which is much more burdensome? Then I think the trade-off in the United Kingdom may change. They may say, okay, fine, we were happy to sacrifice the right to innovate in regulatory terms in order to have market access to the EU, but now we're 15, 20 years later, things have changed. The opportunities outside of the EU have become much bigger, and I don't think it's gonna last 15 years, but it's not gonna happen immediately. Then some minor points. Indeed, the European Court of Justice was kept out of this, which I think is also a good thing. It's just weird to have the top court of one of the partners to a treaty to serve as an arbiter, but nevertheless, that's what the EU is demanding for its relationship with Switzerland until today, and I expect the EU to ultimately drop this demand, which would be wise and which would be a good thing, because then finally we can also make progress in further opening up trade between Switzerland and the EU, something that was to a degree held hostage by this dispute over the ECJ, and the EU trying at all costs to get the ECJ to serve as the arbiter in the relationship with Switzerland. Last but not least, of course, fisheries, very important for fishing communities. And I would also like to add Northern Ireland as a winner to a degree as a result of the fact that there is a deal, because imagine if there would have been no deal, then you would have had tariffs that had to be imposed also on intra-UK trade, which would have become even more complex than the situation we have today, which is very, very troublesome. Now then, to look at the bad and the ugly, that's quite a lot. The Financial Times has described it as a wall of bureaucracy, quote unquote, that has descended on business on both sides of the channel. And I'm afraid that's not so far from the truth, and I hope I'm wrong. There's, of course, the rules of origins bureaucracy. There's the risk that indeed the arbiter would ultimately allow the EU to impose tariffs. After all, there are the non-tariff barriers, the existing non-tariff barriers, not just for the City of London and big finance, but also for the recognition of professional qualification, small service providers. I think that's all very unfortunate. There is the risk that there will not be a deal on data. I think that's in 6 months' time, if I'm not mistaken, that has to be sorted. Then there's this example of the musicians, indeed, with both sides seemingly accusing each other not to have foreseen this. And then I'm wondering, okay, like, why not update the deal as soon as possible? The festival season will start in April. So I mean, why not have already negotiations starting over, let's say, an addendum to the deal? Fundamentally, I think for now, a lot will depend on how both sides will implement everything. I would hope and also expect a lot of flexibility in policing everything. The question is, will that be enough? I'm not so sure. I would also argue that a lot more mutual recognition will need to be added. I think indeed for that you would need to legally update the deal. Again, I would argue that as soon as possible both sides sit together and the EU asks itself the question, do we really profit from not simply recognizing all the regulations, standards from a country that is ultimately so similar to other European countries, perhaps indeed with expanding this mechanism to then punish the UK with tariffs. I'm not a fan of that, but it's better than to sort of impose dynamic alignment. So I think that's one thing. Then maybe one more thing is, of course, VAT, the fact that, if I understand it well, because VAT is truly the tool of the devil already without Brexit, and with Brexit it becomes even worse. So UK sellers will now in theory have to register in the VAT bureaucracy of every single member state they want to export to. Now, why not agree something? I mean, I'm just making this up out of the blue, but for example, agreeing that the UK pays a lump sum every year to compensate the EU and its countries and its member states for lost VAT income, and in return, UK companies are exempt from having to go through that VAT mess. But perhaps there's many issues with that because VAT is incredibly complex. But seems to be, at least from the media reports that I have read, something that is becoming a major issue for trade, and that's of course very unfortunate. And I think the EU has to stop saying, well, why don't you take over our system? I think the obvious compromise here is that both sides recognize each other's systems, and I would have that as sort of my suggestion for the relationship going forward.
Thank you, Peter. That was very detailed, but indeed you touched on many points like data adequacy. Will we know it by June? It seems to be like an easy way to deal with that. And GDPR, obviously, will there be GDPR too, as you just said? These are very important topics, which I think we need to understand on the field. What does it mean to our lives, right? I think people don't really see that yet, what it exactly means. But thank you for the insights. So finally, last but not least, Tim, over to you.
Thank you very much. The question we're asked is Brexit done, I guess? And I would say, well, clearly that's not the case. On the upside, at least if you're a fan of the EU, I don't think there is any chance, as some Eurosceptics persisted on hoping during those 4 years, that Britain's departure from the EU would somehow lead to the collapse of the EU itself in the long term. That doesn't seem to have happened either to the EU in terms of its ability to negotiate the deal with the UK, and nor, I think, is it very likely to happen in either the short, the medium, or the long term. And it's very noticeable, I think, that Brexiteers have gone very quiet about that. They seem now to be taking, you know, a kind of macabre pleasure in the slower rollout of the vaccine in some European countries, but that is very far from arguing, as they used to, that somehow Britain's departure would cause what they thought was the house of cards to collapse. So I don't doubt that the EU is going to survive this. And I don't doubt, of course, that there's a lot more to do. We've already heard from the other speakers that that is very much the case. Even if you believe that this is a reasonably good deal for either side, or indeed both sides, there are a lot of edges that require rounding off, and a lot of bodies set up within the TCA itself to do that rounding off. So we've already heard about some of the issues that require rounding off. There are some trade issues. There are clearly a lot of issues for the UK with regard to Northern Ireland, but they involve the EU as well, with the question of data flows. There's security cooperation, which needs to be talked about. And of course, you know, if we step back a bit, we have to recognise, and people already refer to this, the fact that services weren't dealt with really in the TCA. But of course, services, and particularly financial services, are incredibly important for the British economy. And we will you know, need to see how much equivalence the EU grants us in that respect. But even if we are granted, or financial services sector is granted equivalence in many ways, that doesn't mean it can't be taken away again, which is a bit of a worry. And of course, there are those two big things that will definitely need to be thought about again, even if it's after a period of years, and that's Northern Ireland and fishing after 5.5 years. What I thought I would talk a little bit about is whether Brexit will actually lead to the two issues that were very important in the decision to leave the EU on the part of the British electorate to go away, and in particular immigration and obviously EU interference itself. I've kind of dealt with the second one, so I'll focus a little bit more on immigration. Now, of course, immigration has actually reduced in recent times, but that's got far more to do with COVID than anything else, I think. But clearly, it is an issue going forward, because the British economy has relied so much on immigration, both in terms of skilled immigration, but also unskilled immigration. Not necessarily of unskilled people, but of skilled people from the EU willing to come in and do unskilled jobs, at least at the start of their time in the UK. Now, if the economy gets back to normal, quote unquote, after some time, then the British economy will continue to express this demand for labour, and it can only really satisfy it in two ways. The first is, you know, the human equivalent of import substitution. So it's going to have to persuade British workers to do some of the jobs that they do in previous times, and that may require wage rises, which may not be a bad thing for the economy, but it will certainly involve more investment in skills and training than the British political economy has allowed for in recent years. Or it's going to have to suck in immigrants as it used to, albeit from perhaps a wider range of countries now that EU citizens aren't favoured. But of course, you know, EU citizens may be able to come in, although I'm not that confident that the new immigration regime, the points-based system, is, you know, sufficiently flexible to allow for the needs of the British economy. But we'll have to see if that can be kind of finessed over time. In terms of the electorate, then, I'm not sure that they're going to see the reduced numbers that so many people who voted for Brexit would like to see. And of course, we will still get stories about asylum seekers and illegal immigration, and we got plenty of that before Christmas in the run-up to the winter, during the autumn, and during the summer. So that will still continue to be a feature of British political life, I suspect. There is then this question of whether politically Brexit will actually deliver the benefits that many people see it delivering, or hoped it would deliver, at least economic as well. To those that voted for it, will they see these kind of tangible improvements? Now, if you look at the focus group research done with those voters, not just by UK and Changing Europe, but by other investigators, you can see that the expectations of many of those so-called left behind voters in those more peripheral small towns are sky high. They really have invested a lot of faith in Boris Johnson being able to deliver tangible improvements in terms of infrastructure, tangible improvements in terms of job opportunities, in terms of manufacturing coming back to their towns, etc. And I'm not sure that that is going to happen, at least in the short term. There really isn't enough time, I think, for the government to deliver the kind of benefits that people had hoped for. Now, of course, it may be good enough to persuade people that they are coming, that they're just starting, they don't have to be fully delivered for it to make a political difference. But quite a lot of the kind of economic forecasting around the consequences of Brexit suggests that some of those places that I've talked about are actually going to find themselves most hit by any kind of economic downside to Brexit. I don't, by the way, think that economic downside will be some very obvious punch in the face. It will be, if there is one, a kind of slow puncture, as people have expressed it. But I do worry that it will be experienced most precisely by those places, but we'll have to see. Final question, what about the parties in the UK, and what does this deal do for them? Well, for the SNP, it's a bit of a boon. And certainly if you see what's happened to Scottish fishermen at the moment, it's not going to do the SNP's reputation with them any harm, that it seems to be, at least in the very short term, very, very disruptive to Scottish fishermen. And of course, the very fact of, according to Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland being ripped out of the European Union against its will is going to play big in the campaign for an independence referendum and independence itself. For the most pro-European of the UK-wide parties, the Lib Dems, clearly I think they'll try and retain their brand as the most pro-European party, but even they are very reluctant to go towards any kind of rejoin scenario. Labour clearly, the main opposition, want to put it behind them if they can. I suspect there will be quite a lot to criticise about the consequences of Brexit, but I think Labour may well hold back, much to the chagrin of some of their members and supporters on that, because I think they do want to get beyond it, because they do feel it's been very damaging for them. They might be able to criticise the absence of trade deals if they don't materialise, for example, but I don't think that will be have a great deal of traction with the electorate. As for the Conservatives, well, I mean, clearly if Brexit works out, there'll be some benefits there for them. But as I say, I think they'll be rather too long term, perhaps, to help them that much at the next election. Of course, leaving the EU does mean that the opportunities for bashing Brussels, while they won't disappear completely, won't be quite as obvious as perhaps they were when we were in the European Union. And coming back to immigration, that does present a bit of a problem, because of course if one of the promises about Brexit was that it would be reduced and it ends up not being reduced, the Conservatives are going to have to explain why that is the case. It's always been a bit of a double-edged sword for them, particularly since Nigel Farage came along. And then just to finish on Nigel Farage, what's he up to? He appears to be trying post-Brexit to mobilise people on the kind of libertarian, anti-lockdown kind of track. Whether that will work, I'm not too sure, because his kind of core vote probably doesn't see much in that kind of thing. But what I would say is don't write Nigel Farage off. There is still a great disconnect, if you like, between the elites and the people, as he would like to see it. There's a lot of opportunity still for that kind of politics, the middle finger, the kind of FU politics, if you like, that Nigel Farage is so good at. And of course, we are talking here about probably one of the most successful politicians in Britain in the post-war era. And that's it.
Thank you, Tim. That was a good party political internal overview. I think Nigel Farage was spotted a few months ago applying for a German passport, I think. So clearly he's looking for alternatives to boost this campaign. But yeah, you touched on a very important point, immigration. I mean, the Circle Foundation is obviously has a Turkey link as well. And the biggest topic was Turkey. So are we now stopping Turkish immigrants from entering the United Kingdom? Or Jill, I mean, what do you think? Like, what will we see in our daily life? Like, we touched on financial services, data, you know, trade, goods, transport, everything. But what does it really mean for our daily lives? Like travel or the life we will have in the UK? Like, what will British citizens perceive differently now after Brexit, and also European citizens? Can you guys more live examples, like real life?
So at the moment, I think the sort of major worries are if you're in Kent, that you'll have long lorry queues somewhere around, and that'll get in the way of you moving around. Traffic flows are very, very low at the moment, partly because of some of the pre-Christmas stockpiling, and that's all been conflated as well by the French border closure without COVID tests and that sort of hiatus. So we haven't really seen as much of that as was anticipated in the government's reasonable worst case scenario, but I think there are fears that might build up in the next few weeks. That's sort of probably a temporary glitch until things readjust, people get used to things, traffic flows regain, but there may be some people who are unwilling to supply the UK. Transport costs may very well go up, which we will then see passed on in slightly higher prices, but you probably won't desperately notice that. At the moment, the people, because of the nature of the lives we're living in COVID land, the main effects people are noticing is when they've tried to order something from the EU. So it's or vice versa. So I think people are being surprised by getting duty paid or duty to pay stickers. I was on a podcast last week with somebody in Brussels who'd made the mistake of ordering some champagne glasses from London for 50 euros and discovered that when they were delivered last week, they came with a demand for an extra 50 euros in terms of duties and things like that. So he was clearly rather taken aback. So I think some of those trades may stop. Some of these figures do seem fairly eye-watering, so and unsustainable. So we'll see how that does. For British citizens who are in Britain, the immediate impacts will really start to be felt, I think, when they try to travel. So when we have to go through a different queue at the airport, I don't think we're segregating queues in the other direction. I think we still need EU citizens to come through our sort of global gates or whatever, because I don't think we've got enough manpower to deal with that. But when we go in, people have said we'll have to go through the non-EU citizens lines, get our passports stamped. Some people are getting worried now who might get caught by the 90 days and 180, particularly second homeowners. More immediate effects from people who haven't yet completely sorted their residency in European countries, so UK citizens living over there. For EU citizens living in the UK, they're still in the 6-month grace period. We haven't yet seen any signs that EU citizens over here are being denied opportunities because they haven't yet got settled status, can't prove their right to be here. We're not really supposed to be checking for that yet, but I expect a bit of that to come through. And the oversight authority for that, the independent monitoring authority, has just gone live. I think people are struggling to come to terms, particularly services businesses, just how this might affect their business model. So what you get if you're not in the UK, but you're sort of listening to what's going on in the UK, is I think we're going to get a drip feed of quite regular stories of this isn't quite what I thought we were getting with Brexit, of minor inconveniences which are consequences of becoming a third country, leaving the single market and the customs unit, that people hadn't quite expected and seem odd, you know, whether it's pet passports, we've got 1 or 2 agreements which we used on EHICs and driving licenses, but I think those will come to feed through and will be a bit of a shock the first 1 or 2, 3 times people think something they took for granted, you know, has hit them in the face, but I think people will gradually get used to a new disposition, and over time people might remember that it didn't used to be like this, and this is quite annoying. The most acute problems for the government at the moment, I think, are probably the fishermen, actually, because if this deal was supposed to deliver for anyone, it was supposed to deliver for fishermen. One of the things was that the very different interests of very different fishermen, those that are constrained by quota, those who sold mainly into the British market as opposed to the EU market, was never really appreciated. They're all lumped together. They're voices of inshore fishermen who depended mainly on exports and weren't quota constrained anyway, were drowned out by the Scottish Fishing Association wanting more quota. Now a lot of those people are actually confronting a pretty existential set of problems in getting their stuff over the border. So the government will have to move quite swiftly. At the moment, its answer is to write checks, but to write checks is not a long-term answer. So they will have to do that. And I think they, notwithstanding what Victoria and Peter said, I think one of the questions longer term for the government to look at again was it refusal to sign up to EU SPS, given the consequences for Northern Ireland and for some of those businesses really sustainable. There was potentially a deal to be done there, but with the constraints on the extent to which the UK could then do trade deals with some other countries, but that will impose some really quite severe costs on some businesses, which have always been in the past regarded as quite politically sensitive.
Thank you, Jill. I'm conscious of the time, but I want to take 2 or 3 more questions from the floor, if it's okay for you guys. Please respond directly to Jill's comment. But I would like to know who would like to respond to the Scottish independence thing, because Tim, touched on that, and how much will it affect the balances in the United Kingdom going forward with the elections coming up? So who wants to take that question?
Well, I can take it if you want. We should say that we're not sure that those elections will take place when they're due to take place because of COVID. So it's worth saying that. But the second thing is, clearly Nicola Sturgeon looks as though, unless something goes very badly wrong with what's going on in Scotland at the moment between her and the previous leader of the SNP, they're having a very big row about that. But if she can put that aside, she looks as though she's going to win a majority at the Scottish Parliament elections if they take place. That will clearly give her a mandate to argue that there should be a second independence referendum. London will argue that the last referendum was supposed to be good for a whole generation. She will come back with the argument that actually, because of the 2016 referendum that's taken us out of the EU, circumstances have completely changed. They're not the same. There is a legal argument to say that, in fact, London can't block a Scottish referendum. Personally, I think that's unlikely. I think actually the power does lie with Westminster. So we may get into a situation, hopefully not as bad as we have seen in Spain and Catalonia, whereby the country concerned wants a referendum. The country of which it is a constituent part denies it that referendum. That could get very, very difficult indeed.
Just to add one thing, Hatice, is that the Scottish National Party will have to answer quite difficult questions about what on earth's going to happen at the border, because the arrangement that we have with the EU, we can put a border in the Irish Sea relatively unobtrusively, but it's not that easy to put put border control posts along the Scotland-England border. It's very poor connectivity there, not very many roads, but it is difficult. The Scottish National Party do not have a very good answer to that. So it makes the identity case for independence much stronger. Brexiteers, I think, find it almost impossible to argue. Victoria may challenge this. I think if you supported Brexit, it's incredibly difficult to make the argument against Scottish independence because you just delete EU and insert UK. But it makes the economic case much harder to argue because it's a much more disruptive change than it was in 2014.
I think the ball is over to you, Victoria.
I would certainly agree as a matter of self-determination. If the Scottish people wish to be independent of the United Kingdom, then they should have the right to pursue that. Whether it would be right to have a referendum again so soon after the first one, when it was supposed to be a once-in-a-generation event, I think is a different question. And also, while I think they should, the people of Scotland should have the right to decide, that doesn't mean to say I think it would be a good idea. I think it would be a pretty bad idea, but nonetheless, as I guess most Remainers would now accept about Brexit, they might think it was a bad idea, but have accepted that as a matter of democratic process. It was an idea that we had the right to pursue. So slightly sitting on the fence there.
All right, thank you. I just want to go to a multilateral topic as well. There is security was mentioned in the chat, but also the Biden administration, that we had some turbulent days in the last few days, and on the 20th there will be a new administration. So how do you guys think it will affect the future UK-EU balance, and will it benefit the UK, in fact, in the G7 or G20 context as well? Would someone like to make a comment on Joe Biden's impact? Nikolai?
Maybe I can speak from a European perspective. It will probably make cooperation easier. I think there was some fear, certainly in Berlin, that there could be a temptation for the UK in case of a second Trump administration in sort of together with a no-deal Brexit, that the UK would completely sever its foreign and security policy ties with the Europeans. And I think we saw over the last 4 years that despite Brexit, on most foreign and security policy issues, the UK sided with the Europeans rather with the United States. So on the Iran sanctions, on the Paris Climate Agreement, on how to deal with the embassy move to Jerusalem, on the question on how to deal with Russia. And I think that was one of the political achievements, that both sides sort of created a wall between the difficult Brexit negotiations and the cooperation in the E3 and other formats, G7 and so on, between France, Germany, the UK, and other European partners. And I think therefore the combination of at least having this foundation of a Brexit deal together with the Biden administration sort of gives some sort of perspective for maybe a little bit of a rekindlement of the West on climate policy, where the UK will play a huge role this year with the COP26 summit, on how to deal with Russia, on how to move forward with Iran. So I think there is some potential here. Where there might be difficulties is on China. Here the UK and the EU seems to be going at least somewhat in different ways, with the EU just having agreed the trade agreement with China, whereas the UK is stricter due to Hong Kong, but also looking towards Washington. And so I think this will be the most interesting field on where the UK and the EU position themselves vis-a-vis the US on the China on the China question, and whether the UK might there work more closely together with the US than the other Europeans.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Jill.
I was just going to say, I think on substance, the Biden administration will be much easier to work with. It's a much more normal administration. The UK is heading the G7 this year, much lower risk with the Biden government there than we've seen how Trump's behaved at other G7s. It's got the climate change summit, which is a huge, big diplomatic focus for the UK. This year, the Biden administration opens the way for that to be a success. Very different dynamics there. I think the bit that will be more difficult for the UK is that I think the Biden administration will want to work very much and very positively with Europe and with the EU in a way that the Trump administration obviously wouldn't. and the UK therefore will have to sort of battle a bit more to be relevant and to be heard, particularly after this year has passed with those two big diplomatic events going.
Yeah, indeed. And just over to you, Peter, do you think, do you think France get, as another big European country, obviously, did they get what they wanted from this deal? And can you make some comments also about like the future security relationship, how you think that will shape up going forward? What's your take on that?
Well, maybe I'll start with the security relationship. I think indeed it's true that they have put a wall between security policy on the one hand and Brexit trade negotiations on the other, which is a wise thing to do. So as a result, I don't think all that much will change as a result of Brexit. As a result of the fact that Biden is president, some things may indeed change, but even with Trump, we could see that certain approaches remained the same. For example, the US approach to Russia did not really change all that much as a result of Trump. Trump probably was quite aggressive to China, but it looks like Biden is going to continue that line, and perhaps we'll see some tension there. Between the EU or European countries like Germany that have a lot of trade with China, or at least seem less willing to start a confrontation, which may be a smart thing to do. I think the Anglo-Saxons and the continental Europeans are gonna get along just fine in security, and when it comes to China or Russia, maybe one of them will be the bad cop, the other will be the good cop. But I don't see big changes on that. When it comes to France having achieved what it wants in Brexit, I think they made some pretty serious concessions, especially when it came to dropping dynamic alignment, and I think France was always aware that was a bit of a long shot, but still, if you look at the detail, the UK seems to really have obtained some a degree of ability to diverge in regulatory terms. Also in fisheries, France has played it quite hard, and there a lot of the access for European fishermen has been preserved. So I would say that's a win of some sort as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, overall, I think both sides are the winners as a result of this deal. But I don't think it should be the end. I think we need more negotiations.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. There's a last question I was asked to ask you guys. Whoever wants it can take it. So obviously, Northern Cyprus, part of Turkey, a Turkish-related foundation. What is your take? Like, will the UK have better relations going forward with Cyprus, and will they diverge more on the accession issues with Northern Cyprus entering the European Union? Does someone want to make a quick comment on that? And then I will move to my final questions for the round before we close up. Who wants to take Cyprus?
So I'm not going to venture an answer on Cyprus because that's very far outside of my expertise. Okay. What I was going to briefly say, because it's a point that came up earlier about immigration from Turkey, is that my understanding is that the existing relationship on immigration that Turkey has with the EU has been replicated in the rollover agreement between the UK and Turkey. Others on the panel may correct me on that, but my best understanding is that the arrangements will continue pretty much as they are vis-a-vis the EU and Turkey, if that's of interest.
Anyone want to jump in? Otherwise, I will move on.
I just join to give the answer to Victoria's question.
Okay, quickly.
So basically, the latest free trade agreement between Turkey and the UK was only based on the customs union agreement. So it was a replication of removal of tariffs and quotas. So it can include the Ankara agreement, which was the the immigration agreement. So therefore, the UK argument has ended. So it wasn't replicated, and it's not going to continue unless there's a separate external agreement that is going to be agreed on between Turkey and the UK, but that one is not included in the immigration agreement.
All right, thank you, Enes, for the clarification. So final round, and then I let you go because it's late, and I'm standing between NTU or Netflix or dinners. So I will round up. My final question, how I like to end around, is if you were Dominic Cummings, or let's say Boris Johnson's new advisor, what would be the one advice that you would give him for the next few days or weeks ahead? I just want to take a quick round, and then I would like to sum it up. And if there are any remarks that you want to make, very briefly, please, let's go in a round. Start with Nikolai. What would be your advice?
Probably focus on the coronavirus. I think nothing is more important for the UK now than focusing on the vaccination program and fixing any troubles there. And Brexit will just be an irritation for that. I think politically also focusing on the coronavirus would be better than now re-engaging on Brexit negotiations.
Yeah, I agree. And not being last minute with announcements, that would be quite helpful for the population. Victoria, on to you. What would be your advice?
So my advice would be that if we don't innovate and reform, we will be essentially keeping all the costs of the EU regulatory model, but foregoing all of the benefits of frictionless trade. And so not overnight, but there should be a serious process, an evolutionary process to make the most of those opportunities.
Thank you. Tim?
I would say don't listen too hard to your chancellor if he argues that the cost of coronavirus is going to have to be borne very soon by a return to austerity, even if he doesn't actually call it austerity. Be very careful about that.
Oh, that's a strong advice. Peter?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think negotiations are actually quite important to try to sort out all the details that have not been properly sorted. So if I were Boris Johnson, then I would make a list of, let's say, the top 20 priorities and communicate this clearly to the EU, request the EU to appoint a successor to Barnier. Apparently that's going to be the current high representative, but we'll have to see. I think it's important that the EU also has a, let's say, special designated UK negotiator. Yeah, and I think that's for Brexit really the important thing. And perhaps indeed, apart from that, the UK should also identify the top 10 opportunities they know have resulting from Brexit, regulations they aim to change, and then also at the same time inform the EU as soon as possible which regulations they want to change. So in some kind of a negotiation and discussion process, they can avoid tariffs as a result of that divergence.
I hope he listens to that. Thank you for that insight. Finally, we started with you. Let's end with you, Jill. What's your advice to Boris?
The absolutely critical thing is to get the vaccine rollout right. If we manage to do it faster than in Europe, that'll be a benefit politically. Not that we're competitive about these things, but generally, I think we've had 4.5 years when everybody except me and Tim and Victoria are sick of talking about Brexit. I would just de-dramatize. If you can identify some opportunities in domestic policy, very low-key way, manage the relationship in a really de-dramatized, mature, long-term, stable way, and just move the agenda on.
Thank you so much. I think you finished on a very good point. The thing is, we have still ongoing negotiations, challenges, but what we shouldn't forget that every speaker touched on, be it on technical issues like data and financial services, in the political side, or even the bilateral relations with European governments, there is still a lot of issues that we're working on together with the governments together. The United Kingdom is still an important partner in global multilateral fora, like the G7 and the G20. So let's not, as you said, let's not dramatize so far, and let's just focus on our common future together and make the best out of it. But thank you for all of your insights. I really enjoyed the discussions with you. I hope the audience tonight enjoyed it as well. Thank you for the audience and participants joining, but also thank you guys for giving us 1 hour, 20 minutes of your time. We really appreciate that. I wish you a wonderful evening. And yeah, I hope we see each other soon, but take care. Please stay safe wherever you are right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.